you start with trade wars heating up, and Apple could be the next victim. The stock falling in the final minutes of trading as the company warns of the impact tariffs could have on a number of their products. Let's get to Josh Lipton in San Francisco for all the details. Hey, Josh.
Mel, Apple, like many companies, did formally submit comments to the USTR, spelling out what the proposed 25% duty on $200 billion worth of products imported from China could mean for the company. Apple saying the proposed tariff list covers a wide range of Apple products, including Apple Watch, AirPods, HomePod, the Mac Mini, Apple Pencil, and Apple adapters, cables, and chargers. Apple telling the USTR that tariffs increase the cost of its U.S. operations, divert resources, and disadvantage the company compared to foreign competitors. Apple saying it is difficult to see how tariffs that hurt U.S. companies and U.S. consumers will advance the government's objectives with respect to China's technology policies. Apple, which had been higher during the day, did turn lower on those headlines. Bernstein's Tony Sacconaghi has argued that Apple is uniquely vulnerable in some sense to China risk. After all, that Greater China accounts for about 20% of Apple sales and that most iPhones are assembled there. But Sacconaghi has also told his clients that on net, he thinks worst-case scenarios remain unlikely for Tim Cook's company, that at the end of the day, he says Apple here in the U.S. directly employs a lot of Americans and sells very popular products. Same goes for China, he notes, where Apple does support 3 million manufacturing workers. Mel, back to you.
All right, Josh, thanks. Josh Lipton in San Francisco. So what does this mean for Apple, and is the market discounting the impact of the trade wars? Guy?
I think it's absolutely discounting the impact of the trade war, but I think you're seeing it in the form of emerging markets. We talked about it last night. There's this thought that it won't be systemic. The emerging market weakness won't make its way here. And maybe that's true. Maybe it is different this time. I don't think it is. What does it mean for Apple? I got to be consistent. I thought the stock has a chance to go to 240 on the valuation that we gave it, 18 times forward earnings on next year's earnings. A lot of people agree. Katie Huberty, Morgan Stanley, and I think Canaccord just did a $250 price target. However, there's nothing wrong with taking some profits here. I mean, you're playing at this point for anywhere from 10 to 12% of upside. And if this thing does get worse, which I happen to think it will, the downside is probably more significant than that. So although you shouldn't trade the stock, this might be one of those inflection points where it's okay, too.
You know, that Sacconaghi note was interesting. He put it out in July, and he basically said, you know, iPhones and Apple products could be taxed 2 times. They could be taxed by China, and they could be taxed by the United States. That's a quantitative impact. But there's also a qualitative impact, which obviously can't be quantified, and that is, you know, what if China does something with the supply chain, makes it more difficult to get components on the ground, et cetera?
Yeah, that's likely to be the near-term disruption, and you're going to see that likely in cautious guidance for the back half of the year. But it's going to be really, I think, probably a supply constraint thing, not exactly a demand for a lot of the products. I think it's really interesting. Josh listed a bunch of the products that the company mentioned. Those are going to the other products. The other products made up about 6.5% of their total sales in the last quarter, so not particularly impactful. And I just want to make one other point. You know, Josh also mentioned that the Chinese employ 3 million, basically through Foxconn, which is Apple's biggest customer, and vice versa. 3 million workers making iPhones, sometimes up to 1 million iPhones a day. That's not something I think the Chinese, with the economy slowing the way it is, they really want to disrupt that too.
No, you know, Apple is not a made in America product. I mean, let's face it, it's made all around the world. And so this is something that, when Tim Cook starts to talk about this, and I think Tim Cook has navigated the politics of this administration remarkably well. And the fact that he also has to operate in China, where there's a lot of politics, good for him. And I hear what Guy's saying about being tactical in the stock. I actually think, you know, Apple has, throughout multiple periods, without necessarily the trade war staring in the face, but periods where it's had a nice run. And I think Apple is one of those stocks that you truly stay in there. I think the valuation is argued, and I think they will weather this. But why not Apple after every industrial company in the world, every resource company in the world? I mean, look at U.S. Steel. Fundamentals of steel couldn't be any better, and this stock's gone from 46 to 29. And by the way, they're adding workers, they're adding capacity, and pretty soon that's going to lead to the exact opposite of what they want.
I mean, Apple's fortunes day to day, week to week, I don't think have anything to do with Apple. I think it's all about money flow. We know that sentiment has shifted in anything that's been steep up and to the right, whether it's a Visa or an Apple or a United Health, meaning it's growth that's been impervious to anything related to the globe or to the economy.
So you don't even think it's fundamental? I'm trying to...
I mean, day to day,
yeah.
Absolutely not. Meaning, if you look at the correlation, the way it's trading with a Visa or again, other super cap names, ISRG, they're trading It's simply, I want to take some profits here and try to play something.
Yeah, but Carter, don't you think that, look at what happened to Facebook. You could have made that argument in a lot of ways before they hit a whole bunch of roadblocks. And there's been a fundamental reason why it's sold off.
That happens only once you get news.
Right.
That's specific to the company. It happened to Red Hat.
Right.
It happened to Twitter. These are specific to those companies. It happened to Facebook.
But what if there was a prolonged trade war that did affect their
Eventually,
ability to
that's what
supply
could happen.
the iPhone?
But right now, the way Apple trades, if you just look at its correlation with things like a Visa, it's trading simply as a money flow issue.
So no reason to panic now.
I don't see it other than it's too steep in the first place, and you might as well take profits.
Right, right. I mean, the price action in Apple, to be fair, not bad. I mean, if you got the headline and you said, hey, guess how the stock would react, I would have guessed a steeper decline.
Especially given a Friday, given what's going on.
Final minutes of trading, going into the weekend, blah, blah.
But again, it's something I said last night, I'll say again tonight. Why would the Chinese, in the environment that we find ourselves here in the United States, with all the acrimony and all the headline risk, why would they be willing to make a deal? Forget about ahead of the midterm elections. Why would they make a deal this year? I don't think it behooves them to do so. Now, I think President Trump's rhetoric will increase. But again, I'll say maybe I'm wrong, but I think the Chinese are much better suited to play a long game.
This to me is all and really only about Made in China 2025. Because as far as I'm concerned, this is our administration, and I agree with a lot of it. Pushing back against this whole desire by China to not be leapfrogged or to leapfrog the U.S. as the dominant global tech player we are. And this century is about technology. And let's face it, that controls the world. So they should want to not be number two. But the reality is, why are they going to let up on this? And I think they want Apple around as long as they need them, which is the classic playbook in emerging markets. You keep around the multinationals, and I'm not going to say you're going to steal their technology. I'm just going to say you use until you do not need that, and you can make it at home. So, we have to be careful here.
Maybe what the Apple story underscores, though, is that perhaps markets are not actually thinking about the actual impact of the tariffs to different products. We might have known the impacts of next round of tariffs on Apple if we really looked carefully at it. I mean, Tony Sacconaghi was able to do it in July. But for some reason today, when Apple comes out and says this is the impact, these are the products that will be impacted, the market listens. We haven't actually gone through that exercise with a lot of companies that might not have the goodwill of China because a Chinese company employs hundreds and thousands of workers to assemble the product over there.
Yeah, so I would just say this. With Apple, this is a very high-priced product, right? And we know that autos has been really in the center of this trade discussion here, but Apple also has a massive margin on their product. There's no other smartphone maker that has a 38% gross margin. So this is really what I think investors have to start thinking about here as this story goes forward. The one other point, though, this is a high-end smartphone market. They get most of those high-end sales in Europe and North America. Obviously, growth areas in emerging markets are really important, like China. But to me right now, they're somewhat insulated. If you're telling me this was an issue for Samsung that has 80% market share globally for smartphones, and they sell at a much, much lower price point and profitability level, that would be a bigger issue. So I actually think in the near term, Apple will be able to navigate this for the very reason that you said. Tim Cook's been able to play both sides of the fence. They were the single largest beneficiary of our tax cut last year. They've been very careful with our administration, and he's also spent a lot of time over with China. So I think they make it out of this thing okay.